guys.
Stop
this
doing
is Lavetta.
that. Stop doing that. And this is Miriam.
And this is Notorious Women Podcast, a comedy podcast about some of history's most notorious women. I just hit my teeth on the microphone.
Lavetta is learning how to use a microphone. Thought that was an apt thing to learn at the beginning of season 3.
Yes, yes, it is season 3. And I just want to say, Miriam, listen, your setup is constant.
Okay.
And it's the same. My setup keeps changing because I am trying to have a hot girl summer. Okay. And I keep moving around.
Like, I can't compete with you, so at least I can have some stability on my side.
No. I'm saying that because
someone's
I'm
like a world
like,
traveler and someone's still here.
No, it's not even world traveling. I wish it was exciting. I missed Essence Fest this week, the summer. But I saw it on TV. I saw my girl Meg Thee Stallion. It's in New Orleans.
Okay.
New Orleans, baby.
I mean,
have you been to New Orleans?
Listen, I've never been to New Orleans. And my husband has been, but like with work. And so he's like, I hate New Orleans. And I was like, maybe you went like incorrectly. Like, you know, like we should maybe try again. And I think you would like it.
It is one of the, and those, for those listeners of ours that are not American, who are not in the States, New Orleans is like exotic to Americans. Like, it is so fabulous. Like, it is haunted. I will tell you that, because of the sea level.
Oh, that's cool.
All of the graves are like above ground, and they have like, and you definitely feel it when you're there. But the food, and I'm a Southern Black woman, and I mean, Southerners are known for our food, right? But even among Southern cuisine, the food in New Orleans, I don't know if they're putting crack in it. I don't know if it's meth. I don't know if it's heroin, but they are putting
I'm not
everything.
I will not ask questions.
The food in New Orleans, even like the touristy places, the food is amazing. Like, really, not to mention, if you were lucky enough. I went to Essence Fest years ago, and that was my first time going out. I always wanted to go, and I'm like, New Orleans, but it's like, I knew it was haunted, and you know, it's like the whole voodoo stuff and all of that. And I went to the Marie Laveau like museum. I didn't touch anything in there because I am a scaredy cat, and I believe that I'm not sure if ghosts or spirits exist, but I just don't want to test it. So I didn't touch any of the shrunken heads. I don't want to mess with them
if they do exist. Yeah, I'm with you.
I'm not messing with the voodoo.
No, I would not do that. Yeah.
But I stayed in the French Quarter, and I'm a nerd, so I took like a walking tour of the area. It is so beautiful. Like, it was just amazing. So I highly, highly recommend anyone going to New Orleans or New Orleans.
Do you remember the movie? You know the movie Girls Trip?
Of course.
The most I know about New Orleans.
Okay. But it is that fun. I will say that. It is that fun. Like, having gone there before the movie came out, I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad they made this movie, because it is that fun. And if you're a drinker, I'm not a drinker, but if you're a drinker, you're going to get your life, because there's a lot of drinking going on.
I'm like a little bit of a drinker, like not a lot of it. Like, I'm going to have a cocktail, and then I'm going to be on the floor, and I'm going to be like, that was a good night. And that's the end of it.
Well, but I'm a foodie. No, I'm just greedy. I'm not a foodie. I'm just greedy. Shrimp and grits.
You can be a foodie and be greedy. Delicious.
I'm telling you, you got to, that's all I'm going to say. I think we should get started, but New Orleans, Louisiana, in the United States of America, go if you can. If you ever get a chance, go. It's amazing.
When Notorious Women goes on tour to visit all of our cities, we will go to New Orleans.
Yes, especially since in our season 3, did you realize?
Okay.
season 2 last episode.
No, I didn't. Nope.
We've only been doing this like how long? You know?
Let's not think about that,
long time.
Lavetta. You know what? Here's the thing. It's like time flies when I'm talking to you. And it flew way past my brain at the end of season 2. And so, but I'm kind of like, how did we do that? We did though.
Oh, we did. That's so sweet. I accept that. I received that. Thank you so much, my dear.
Okay.
On that note, let's get started. Oh, thank you. I believe I am first this week, and I have a doozy. So for those of you who are visiting us or hearing us for the first time, the way it's set up is that it's Notorious Women Podcast. Again, it's a comedy podcast, so we make jokes off of stuff that may not be so funny, like death and murder. Yeah. And also,
it's not tasteful. No,
it's not. Some of these women are tripping, and we call them out on it. We are not shy. We are feminist. We are proud feminist and womanist. But sometimes bitches be bitching, and we're gonna call them out on it. So, but each week the format is that we each research a notorious woman, and she could be notorious because she's heroic, or she could be notorious because she was horrific. And we each research our separate woman, and we tell each other about it each week. We don't know what each person's going to cover, so it's a bit of a surprise. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's bad, but it's always funny.
Sometimes, like, I need a minute to get off the floor and then continue. Girl, you just like to talk about torsos.
I like stab, murder.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
I mean.
Okay.
Even though,
fine.
Listen, if you know anything really about women are far better at crime and murder than men are. We got a lot of rage.
Yeah.
Sometimes
really
we direct it to the wrong people. And sometimes motherfuckers have it coming. I'm just saying. But this week, I am not covering a murderess. I am actually covering. So my notorious woman this week is Martha Washington. Yep.
Shut up. Okay.
That's right, baby. I know you've been waiting for it.
I have.
So, let's get into it.
Okay.
Martha Washington, aka the first lady of the United States of America. Now, before I get started, some of my sources are from mountvernon.org website. A video on YouTube from American Corner is the name of the account, and also another video, research video. It's called George Washington's Mount Vernon. So, among many other sources, but those are some of the sources. For,
listen, you keep saying today. Mount Vernon, and all I want to do is sing Hamilton.
I know.
In New York.
You're gonna love this.
That was not the note. Okay, let's go.
You're gonna love this. Okay, so Martha Washington was born Martha Dandridge on June 2nd, 1731. On her parents' tobacco plantation in Chestnut Grove in Newcount County and then it was the colony of Virginia, but we'll say Virginia. So she was the oldest daughter of 8 children of John Dandridge, a Virginia planter and politician who immigrated from England, and Frances Jones. So 1731. Wow. Okay.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah. As the oldest of 8 children, including one sister that was about 25 years her junior. So it's a big age gap.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Martha was...
When you start having babies at 14, I guess that's what happens.
Basically.
I'm making that up. I have no idea, but
I mean,
probably not wrong. Yeah.
You're probably close to it. Now, as the oldest of eight, she played a maternal and domestic role, beginning, with her younger siblings. Now,
Okay.
though her family, they were considered upper class. They were not moneyed upper class.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't. Okay.
it kind of reminds me of like, you know how in one of my favorite Pride and Prejudice, the Bennets, they have
Yes,
stuff,
I
but they're
do.
not the Bingleys or,
Oh,
they're not, she's not
oh my
Darcy
God.
or Bingley,
No,
right?
5,000 a year. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
5,000.
Oh,
Yeah. So that's sort of what I got from the research, that her family, so they were considered like, probably middle to, I would say upper class, like as far as like reputation, but they didn't have a lot of money. The
right.
plantation was small. It wasn't like a vast kind of thing. So it was very important, as we know, because we know everything
Mm.
there is about Pride and Prejudice. Um,
Mm-hmm,
it was
mm-hmm.
very important, though, for the oldest daughter to marry well, because that sets the
Yes.
precedent for the other younger women as well.
Yes.
So, and so before we get to her first marriage, I said first, but
Oh,
so she
snap.
wasn't,
What? Okay.
yeah,
Go on.
yeah. So even though they didn't have a lot of money, she was brought up like a woman of her station would be brought up. So like even
Right.
upper class women back then, girls did not have formal education.
No, they
So
learned like piano and how to curtsy.
pianoforte, yes.
Yes, the pianoforte.
We're joking, but it's true. So
It is
basically,
true.
she learned how to read, and her reading consisted of reading the Bible for an hour each day.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of her education comprised of learning how to sew, knit, learning how to ride a horse, instructions in music, dancing, and probably the most important of them all, learning how to run a household of slaves.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and
What?
servants.
But I thought we loved her. What? Go on.
No.
Mm.
Now, side
Mm-hmm.
note, she
Mm.
may have also had an illegitimate half sister born into slavery, a woman by the name of Anne Dandridge Costin, and an illegitimate white half brother named Ralph Dandridge. So apparently, Daddy was a bit of a rolling stone.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Daddy didn't know where the zipper on his pants was. Okay.
It was good to be a white man back then with any
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
property. So good.
Yeah. Sure
Um,
was.
Now, again, because she was the oldest daughter of a, upper class but not wealthy planter, it was important for her to aim for the stars when coming up with a marriage match. So in 1750, at the age of 18, just 18,
Oh,
she
God.
married the son of a wealthy planter by the name of
Okay.
Daniel Park Custis, who was also 2 decades her senior.
Oh, wow. Oh,
So he was in his
no.
30s.
38.
She was,
No.
yeah, he was about
No.
30. He was almost 2 decades. He was about 35, 36. Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm. I remember being 18. No, thank you. 30s. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Yes. But she married well. So after they were married, she moved with her husband to his residence, which was called White House Plantation
That feels right.
on the Pamunkey River. So
Okay.
over the next 7 years, they had 4 children, but only 2, John and Martha, would survive into childhood. So they had 4 children,
Okay.
but only 2 would survive
Oh.
after past the point of being toddlers. Now, the match, by
Oh.
all accounts, was a successful one because not only did they have 4 children, but again, her husband was one of the wealthiest men in the Virginia colony, as well
Okay.
as one of the largest slave owners, owning nearly 300 slaves. So about
Wow.
285, 290 people he owned.
What a successful person. I have
Well-
so many other things I want to say right now. Yeah.
Well, this is when we talk about reparations, this is what we're talking about because
Yeah.
back then, most of your wealth was in how much land you had, but also how many slaves you owned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because somebody needed to till the soil for free. Now, so everything was looking up for Martha basically, but at least until she hit about 26. And at that time, John suddenly died in
Oh, shit.
1757. Yeah. And That's also what happens when you marry an older man. But I mean, he was still early
he was 42.
to mid 40s. Yeah. So that's still
But,
young.
you know.
But that's why he suddenly died and he didn't have a will. And because of that, she received 1/3 of his estate outright. And the remaining 2/3 were granted to their 2 young children that was to be doled out once they reached adulthood and or married.
Okay.
So part of her inheritance is that she inherited 17,000 acres of land and those slaves, hundreds of slaves.
Oh, she must have loved that. Probably did.
Well,
let's find out. Okay.
So, now, because of the nature of his will, and this will come back later in the story, but like it was sort of kind of complicated, and also running 17,000 acres of land, as well as 300 people, as well as other like indentured servants, all kinds of things. Running.
They just loved controlling humans. Okay.
Yeah, but it was a lot to take on. But she apparently loved this new freedom. Again, she's 26, so she's very young, and she's suddenly wealthy. So again, this is a woman that came from a modestly wealthy family who were aspirational in attaining wealth, and that's exactly what happened. She married well, and then the guy died, and then she had all the money, right? So
it's like the scene in Queen Charlotte.
Yep.
Oh no, he's dead. Oh my God, I did it. Exactly. I'm wealthy. I'm titled. Yes.
Exactly. Okay. So after he had died and, they'd gone through all the funeral services, she wrote to his lawyers in England, and she directed them to direct all business issues to be sent directly to her. Basically, I'm in charge, bitches. Yeah. So, now, because she's still only 26, I'm sure the social pressure, and also she's still a young woman, she had a lot of suitors all of a sudden. And maybe, again, socially, the pressure was on for her to remarry. Because, again, she's still a well-heeled, she's wealthy also, but also, like, she has a good reputation. She's still young. So I would imagine in a patriarchal society, the pressure, had she been 10 years older, 36, maybe not so much, but 26, the pressure to remarry probably was on.
TikTok, yes.
Yeah. So, now also the fact that she was now one of the wealthiest women in the 13 colonies would also attract a lot of suitors, which
do you think that would have an effect on their opinion of her? I wonder. Huh. We'll never know. We'll never know.
She was suddenly bombarded with a lot of suitors, a lot of young bachelors coming a calling.
And listen, they thought she was so pretty and also so smart. Okay, go on.
Yeah, and I mean, one of those who came a calling was, as I'm sure you've guessed by now, a young soldier by the name of George Washington.
No.
Now,
just kidding. I did know.
Now, the two had a brief courtship and married on January 6th, 1759. So about 2 years.
January 6th, huh?
January 6th. Oh, well.
Interesting.
There you go.
Okay.
And they got married at the White House plantation, where they also honeymooned, after which they moved to his Mount Vernon estate.
Got it.
Now, this was, again, another great match for Martha by all accounts, but it was even better for George because, you see, George Washington was the eldest of his father's second marriage, not his father's first marriage. So he was not his father's oldest son.
Right.
So when George's father passed, George only inherited 10 people, 10 slaves.
Whilst only 10 human beings. Okay.
Yep. Now, his eldest brother, Lawrence, inherited the majority of the father's estate. And it was called Little Hunting Creek, which he then renamed Mount Vernon.
Okay.
So Little Hunting Creek was the original name. But when Lawrence died suddenly in 1752, George leased Mount Vernon from Lawrence's widow, Anne, but then inherited outright after her death in 1761.
Okay.
So 2 years after he and Martha married. So when he and Martha married, they went to Mount Vernon, which makes sense because it's like, even though he's using her first husband's wealth, because basically, don't forget, Daniel Park Custis, this is his wealth. The slaves.
Right.
This is, and forgive the dogs. They are barking. They are going
I can
crazy.
hear them.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I love dogs.
I know. It's probably just an Amazon package being delivered,
Oh,
or because they have to let him know not to mess with this house.
Right.
But anyway,
Listen,
so
you're protected. That's all I need to know.
I am.
Excellent.
I am.
Yes.
So again, all this wealth that Martha has is really Daniel's wealth, really. And
nobody has wealth. They did nothing.
They did nothing.
They just existed, both of them. Just call an effect a fact. Okay.
Call an effect a fact. So again, this was a marriage up for George. This was a great match financially, but again, they got along. So it wasn't like it. And I also think maybe Martha, having come from a family that was not as wealthy as well, she could kind of relate to George in that way. And she's like, well, I have money. So if this is a love match, this is great. Right. Which it did seem to be a love match.
Okay.
So after they got married, again, on January 6, 1759, they went to Mount Vernon estate after the honeymoon at the White House, which was Daniel Custis's estate. And about 2 years after they started living at Mount Vernon, the Mount Vernon came completely into George's control. But also, George was able to use Martha's considerable wealth and her 300 slaves to expand the wealth at their home in Mount Vernon and turn it into a profitable estate.
You know what? If people are wondering what people are complaining about generational wealth and what it is, I think you've summed it up pretty nicely.
Yes.
They've done nothing and they are rich.
Yes.
Also, they own people, which is a side note, but I've noted it. Okay, go on.
Now, as such, the wealth was mostly from slaves, land, and other financial assets. It made Martha and George's life very comfortable. Later, it would make the transfer of assets when they would pass on a little bit more complicated because, again, with Daniel, her first husband's wealth, he rightfully so, it's like we're all getting rich off of slaves, but like I want to make sure that money stays within the family, and then his family, obviously, which their two children together is part of that family. So now they had Martha and George did not have any children together, which I did not know.
I did not know that. Okay.
I didn't either, but they raised her two surviving children, John and Patsy, like their own. And then but unfortunately in 1773, Patsy died when she was about 17. She had an epileptic seizure. So, which was definitely deadly back then.
Yeah.
And so the Washingtons,
paper cuts were deadly back then.
Even for rich people. So, Martha and George raised her children like their own after she passed. They always hoped for more children together, but they were unable to conceive.
Okay.
Now, from 1759 to 1775, Martha and George lived at Mount Vernon, where they tended to their plantation. Martha ran the household and regularly entertained guests. She entertained almost daily, having visitors for dinner or for longer stays. Basically, the family became more prominent in the political and social life of Virginia.
Yes, I know that.
Then,
because Hamilton,
of course,
go on.
Because Hamilton. And of course, George was rising through the ranks, and then now buttressed with his wife's wealth, he can really focus on what he liked and what he was good at. So
wait a minute. So you're saying that his wealth helped him gain political power? Is that what you said?
I'm saying that his wealth allowed him to buy really, really expensive boots with gold laces that he could pull himself up by.
Oh, yes. Bootstraps. My favorite word. Okay.
Yes. So, meanwhile, many of the slaves didn't even have shoes, but that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah. So why are we focusing on that?
And again, I'm not saying they're slaves, but in throughout history. So what have you.
Yo, I cannot imagine. Listen, if their slaves were miraculously treated amazingly, we would know. Right?
I'm going to get to that. So.
Okay.
So as we all know, in 1775, George Washington became the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, aka the rebels fighting against the British. Now, Martha strongly supported George's role in the Patriot movement and his work to advance she worked to advance his beliefs in the cause. So when he was called away in 1775, she stayed at Mount Vernon overseeing the construction of new wings. So she basically held down the fort. She held her man down.
Okay.
And she, along with her brother-in-law, they kind of helped just build up Mount Vernon and concentrate on the home. They basically kept things at the home front well tended to. And the revolution, when he went away in 1775, that was the first time in their marriage that they were apart for an extended period of time. Because again, by all accounts, it was a love match.
Right. Okay.
But in the fall of 1775, Martha traveled to Massachusetts to meet with George. On her journey north, she experienced her newfound celebrity status for the first time as the wife of a famed general.
Ah, yes.
She eventually joined him in Cambridge, from where he and the other Continental Army officers were operating. While staying in Cambridge, she served as a hostess for guests of the officers. She would also sew clothes for the soldiers, encouraged other officers' wives to do so, leading to the creation of a sewing circle that contributed to the war effort. Okay. She accompanied him when operations were relegated to New York, but she also went with him to Philadelphia as British soldiers came closer. Each spring, she would return to Mount Vernon when she was able to, and take, and just keep the household intact and just check on things. She basically was the kind of wife, again, I think it was a love match. They were well suited, and they genuinely had true affection for each other. Now, there is some tragedy, because in 1781, their son John was serving as a civilian aide to his father during the siege of Yorktown, and he eventually died of camp fever.
That is not in the musical Hamilton. I'm just pointing that out.
So at this point, by 1781, all of her children had died.
Do you mean 1781? Sorry. I'm back on track. Here I am. That's very sad. Sorry.
And then after John's death, Martha and George took in two of his youngest of his four children and raised them as their own. After the war against the British was won, the Washingtons then returned back to Mount Vernon in 1783 to focus on life once again. Now, Martha was in her 50s at this time, so she believed like public service was over. And by all accounts, she spent about a third of the wartime in camp on the front lines, near the front lines. Yeah, okay. So she really contributed to keeping the morale up, because we know the new Americans won against the British, but people didn't know that was going to happen at the time. So
nothing is inevitable, truly.
Exactly. But now they're back at Mount Vernon in 1783. So she's like, okay, we're back together. We're going to go back to throwing parties and being fabulous and being rich white people.
It's the dream.
Yeah. And so the house became basically, like lively again. They were throwing parties. Things were getting back to normal. Basically, they were living a charmed existence. Right. It was only, and so that went on for about 4 years when George was asked to participate in the Constitutional Convention in 1787, which was great. But again, they're like, things are great. And then in 1789, they elected him to be the first president of the United States. So after the war, though, and after going through all of that, Martha's like, I don't know about all that. She was like,
Can you just be like someone's secretary or something? I know. President? That's like a lot. It's a commitment.
We're in our 50s. It's the 1780s. It's a lot of dirt.
Basically 97 years old right now. Okay.
Yeah. So at first she wasn't really psyched about him becoming president. And she didn't immediately join him, in the then capital of New York City, at first. And then eventually she joined him in May of 1789. But along that journey is when she realized that, again, her presence is very important to the cause, right? These new Americas. And it was also during this journey that she gave her only public speech as First Lady. And she thanked everyone, that came to see her. She arrived on the presidential barge, escorted by George, and immediately established the president's wife as a public figure.
Interesting.
So she's the one that really set the precedent for this, being the first one. After arriving at the Capitol, she was crowned the First Lady of the United States, aka the First Lady, though at the time the term that they referred to her as Lady Washington.
Well, because they're still kind of British in their heart.
Yeah, exactly.
And
they're still trying to now the first presidential residence was on Cherry Street, followed by a house on Broadway. The
Shut up, I know those streets. Okay.
I know, right? And then the capital was moved to Philadelphia in 1790.
Right.
And then, so Martha preferred Philadelphia over New York, because she felt like she had a greater social life. Sorry. I know. Well, back then too.
Sorry, Philadelphians. Okay.
Well, she felt like the social life in Philadelphia was closer to what she experienced in Mount Vernon.
Okay.
So early in her husband's presidency, she had little opportunity to go out. And that's probably why she wasn't able to go out in New York. But once they got to Philadelphia, they loosened themselves up, maybe because he had been president for a couple years.
Yeah.
And so they started entertaining a lot more and just going out personally. Now, while serving as First Lady, Martha became close to Polly Lear, the wife of George's secretary, Tobias Lear. She also socialized with Lucy Flucker Knox, wife of the War Secretary Henry Knox, and of course, Abigail Adams, who would become the second First Lady.
Yes, indeed.
Now, as the First Lady, many of her practices in the White House became traditions for future First Ladies, including the opening of the White House to the public on New Year's Day, a practice that would continue until the Hoover administration. She hosted
I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
In high school. Okay.
In high school. She hosted many affairs of state at New York City and Philadelphia. And she took the responsibility of being the First Lady very seriously. So she would always return official calls every day, that a woman would call and leave her card at the presidential home. Martha would always respond within 3 days.
Wow. So, I don't text back that easily. Okay.
I know, right? So she basically settled into the role and became a model First Lady. But then when she found out that they wanted him to run a second term, she protested. She was like, I want to get back to living rich and fabulous in Virginia. What are you doing, man? What are you doing?
Do you realize the levels of power we already have? Let's go home.
Yeah.
We're rich white people who own other people. Yeah, darling, it's perfect.
I don't have to work for a living. But when he was reelected in 1793, she reluctantly accepted that she would have to be First Lady for 4 more years. So we're into the second term of George Washington's term and Martha Washington's second term as First Lady. So about 3 years into the second term, Martha and her husband were about to embark on a task that I think puts a little bit of stain on an otherwise pristine reputation. Because, again, publicly, these are like goals, right? Like couples goals. Like, again, they're wealthy. They seem to be, she seems, by all accounts, she was a gracious host. People were surprised at how gracious and welcoming she was in public. They have a pristine reputation. But
okay.
So
Yeah.
And about 1796, one of their slaves, a young woman by the name of Ona Judge, aka Oni Judge,
Oni.
who
Okay.
was with them in Philadelphia, escaped and fled to New Hampshire.
Go, girl. Go. Run.
Oni Judge was born at Mount Vernon, and even though Oni's father was white, he was a sailor by the name of Andrew Judge, but her mother Betty was enslaved, and actually Betty was enslaved. And the reason why this is why when people are like, oh, biracial, black, da da da. In slavery time, this is why we have a one drop rule too in America. They had a rule that they called, it was a rule that mandated basically the children of slave mothers would inherit the legal status of the mother. And
of course they had that rule, Lavetta. Of course they did.
And this is very convenient when you want to institutionalize the rape of your female slaves and prosper at the same time, because not only do you get to rape a woman, but you also get to then own her offspring and continue to build your workforce.
Yeah.
But I digress. Okay.
Do you have an opinion about that?
I digress.
Yeah.
But there was actually a law on the books, right?
Was it called the one drop rule? Is that?
No.
Because I think we should call it that.
That's the unofficial. That's why when people who are not from the United States, they don't understand. They're like, what if you're biracial? No. In the United States, this is a way to basically the way white supremacy works in the United States is there's white people and then there's the rest of us.
I mean, it's really true. Like if you have a drop of anything else, I wouldn't vote Republican. I'm just saying, like, they don't like you, you know? Yeah. Okay.
Now, and at this time, white was even more restrictive. It was basically WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Well, we have a lot more people who are considered white now than back then. Like now, if you're Italian, if you're Jewish, if you're Irish, you're just white and you prosper under white supremacy to a degree, right? Different degrees, but like,
and the Irish thing always confused me, but that's a Catholic thing because I'm like, Irish people are literally white, like pale.
Yeah.
Like,
you can't.
But it's the English-Irish conflict. So that's where that comes into place. So now Betty, Oni's mother, was also part of the original group of enslaved people owned by Martha's first husband, Daniel Park Custis. Okay. So that's how Betty came to live at Mount Vernon. And then while she was there, she and Andrew Judge, who was a free white man, he wasn't even an indentured servant. He was a sailor from England, reproduced this child. And because of that law, Oni was then in bondage. And by all accounts, Oni was very light skinned and she had freckles. Again, she was enslaved. So Oni now, even though, again, she was born there at Mount Vernon, she was brought into the big house, as we would say, likely as a playmate to Martha's granddaughter, Nellie Custis. When she was about, I think they said she was about 10 or 11. Now,
that's how to make friends, purchase them.
Oh, yeah.
What? Yeah.
Okay. She eventually became the personal attendant or body servant to Martha herself. And in an interview with Oni in 1846, she said that she had received no education under the Washingtons nor religious instruction.
Oh, okay.
So the whole thing, like, they treat their slaves like family. They're part of the family.
Yeah.
Now, so because she was a personal maid to Martha, when they went to, New York and Philadelphia, Oni came with them. And Oni, along with a few, I believe they said it was about 7 or 8 other enslaved people that came with her from Mount Vernon. For the first time, they encountered free black people. So they were like, oh, just because you're black doesn't mean you're enslaved. And also, like the Washingtons, they began to experience a little bit more personal freedom and being able to go out into the city, spend time with other people, because there's things to do in the city versus being in a rural, setting like in Virginia. So, but she got to taste freedom, like actual freedom. And so it was great at first. And then, and so Oni, like a lot of the other enslaved people, were like, okay, this is possible, right? You see it, you can be it, right?
Exactly.
But what they didn't know is that Martha and George had they had basically come up with a scheme to skirt the law in Pennsylvania. So so they were in Pennsylvania in 1793, 96, right? So
Right.
in 1780, Pennsylvania passed a gradual abolition act that granted freedom to any personal slave brought into the state and who lived there for more than 6 months. Basically, if you live there for more than 6 months, you could free yourself. Right?
Go Philadelphia. Get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Martha and George devised a scheme that would rotate out the slaves between Philly and Mount Vernon.
Listen, I don't want to call our first president a motherfucker, but I just did. So it's too late. Okay.
So that was bad enough. And they figured since they didn't teach them how to read, because also it was illegal to teach an enslaved person how to read. But it's like they're talking to people. So obviously the people in Philadelphia, along with the white people who are like, slavery sucks, abolitionists are going to tell them about the law. Martha and George, these people are not dumb. Anyway, so according to that, so that was bad enough. But she's thinking, okay, we're here now, right? But then when Oni heard that Martha intended to gift her to her granddaughter as a wedding gift.
The fuck? Go on.
Which would mean that she'd be forced to move further down south and even Virginia.
Right.
Oni escaped with the help of Philadelphia's free black community. So she escaped to New Hampshire. Now, one source says that, which said that, quote, despite Martha's insistence to her husband that Judge should be returned and again should be Washington's slave, the president did not attempt to pursue Judge, end quote. I'm calling poppycock on that. Poppycock. Because we now know that it was not true. According to Oni Judge historians, after Washington's second tenure ended in 1797, they began to actively pursue Oni to bring her back home.
Were they bored? Is that because he retired? So he had nothing else to do?
No, because he's president. He has to be seem like a good guy as a PR move, right?
Okay.
So because in September of 1797, so this is about a year after, within a year, George wrote to Oliver Walcott Jr., the Secretary of the Treasury, about having Oni captured and returned by ship. But when Joseph Whipple, Portsmouth collector of customs in New Hampshire, interviewed her, and he was like, because they were abolitionists in New Hampshire. He was like, well, she doesn't want to go back, so I'm not going to force her. And then Whipple responded back to George's representatives that any news of an abduction that would cause a riot on the docks by supporters of abolition if they tried to kidnap her.
Gotta keep the peace, man. Don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. But he did say, Whipple said, well, that he had talked to Oni, and Oni said that if they agreed to free her upon their deaths, because she's figured they old, right? That's coming soon.
Right.
That she would return of her own free will. So George wrote back, quote, I regret that the attempt you made to restore the girl, Oni Judge, as she's called herself while with us, and who without the least provocation absconded from her mistress, should have been attended with so little success. To enter into such a compromise with her as she suggested to you is totally inadmissible. He goes on to say, it would neither be politic or just to reward unfaithfulness with a premature preference of freedom, and thereby discontent beforehand the minds of all of her fellow servants who by their own steady attachments are far more deserving than herself of favor, end quote. So basically, this uppity negress has some nerve. And if we're going to grant anybody freedom, it'd be the people who like being slaves. At least we think they like being slaves.
Yeah, they love it here. Everyone loves it here. What are you talking about?
So, of course.
Wow. So she's the traitor. Cool.
She's the traitor.
Okay.
She's ungrateful. Yeah. So, according to Oni was like, say less, motherfuckers. Say less. So they dropped the matter for another 2 years because, again, he has to publicly appear to be like a noble person, right?
Right, yes.
Especially in the North, because in the South, they're like, yeah, slaves. In the North, they're like, to own another person, if we're religious, is that really a thing? I don't know if that's really a thing.
Maybe not.
Yeah. But
wait, is he still president 2 years later? No.
So his term ended in 1797 because she ran away in 96. So in 97, they began actively pursuing her.
Right.
And so he wrote yeah, exactly. Right. Now, so she was like, say less, motherfuckers. But 2 years later, they were still trying to get her to come back.
Wow.
So in August.
Maybe take up like a hobby, like learn to like horseback ride, like a new way, or like maybe painting.
But also, this is one thing. This is one young woman, right? Yeah. Obviously, they still have many slaves to run. And she left her family members back in Mount Vernon.
But you know what? If my baby escaped a bad situation, I want my baby to stay where they are. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's exactly what you want.
Because despite what people try and tell you nowadays, slavery sucked balls.
It turns out.
I actually, what we're learning is that it was a lot worse than we actually thought when you learn the details of it.
Yeah.
So in August of 1799, 2 years later, he wrote again to his nephew, Burwell Bassett Jr., requesting his help in kidnapping Oni, right?
Okay, Burwell.
Burwell went to New Hampshire, and he just showed up at her house to try and convince her. And she's like, I'm good. So later he was dining at the house of a senator, and he started talking about the Oni thing, and he basically admitted that he came up with a scheme to kidnap her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Love me some Burwell. Okay. Yeah.
The senator, again, these are New Hampshire people. They were like, not in my backyard. They helped Oni escape the kidnapping attempt.
Yes.
Yeah. Because these white people are like, you think we're on the same side? No, we're not on the same side.
That I will say, as a white person, you get mistaken for being on that side. And so sometimes it can be helpful because they will say stupid shit to you and you're like, tell me more. And then you know things like that you wouldn't know. Right. And then you can be like, I hear you, but no. Right. And then you can try to fix it best you can. So
they were still harassing this young woman 2 years after, like almost 3 years after she had escaped. Now, Oni, the reason why we know a lot of this about Oni Judge is because she, like more than any other slave at Mount Vernon, was interviewed twice by abolitionist newspapers in the mid 1840s. So this is why we know a lot of this. Now, in case you're wondering, if you're like, well, maybe it was all George, it wasn't Martha. Stop me that. Because according to Martha, quote, the blacks are so hard in their nature that they have not the least gratitude for the kindness that may be showed to them, end quote. That's a quote from Martha Washington in 1795. And this is before Oni escaped.
I don't want to be like that white girl who's like, oh my God, I had no idea. Cause like I do, but like, wow, she like wrote that shit down. She was not even trying to pretend to hem or ha. No, she was like, I am racist and I'm going to write this down on this parchment.
I will say that is a quote that's from, I think it's either from Mount Vernon. I think it's from mountvernon.org. It's from that website.
Yeah.
So that is a quote that Martha Washington said. Basically, these ungrateful Negroes, I was kind to them. I gave them food. So now, by all accounts, Martha was furious that Oni had escaped.
That makes me happy.
And after that quote, you're like, yeah, I bet she was. Now, no, what's even crazier is that while they were continuing to harass this young woman, George was obviously battling an illness because he died on December 14th, 1799. So he sent his nephew to harass Oni in August of that year, and he died that same year.
So like on his deathbed, one of the last actions of our first president was to capture an ungrateful
Negress.
Slave. Yeah, I'm not going to say it. You can.
Yeah.
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 That was you, like, as the first president of these here United States, get her. Like, motherfucker. I can't with him. Yeah. I can't with her either, but like, can't with either of them.
Yeah, this is, but see, black people have always known that this is a lot of white people. Now, what I have known is that he could have freed his slaves and has not. And so I have been battling my children's education since they were in kindergarten. Drawing pictures, of President's Day. So we have George Washington and we have Abraham Lincoln. And those are the two presidents. And I'm like, you can keep Abraham Lincoln. Still problematic, like a little, but I will let you have him. But I will not sit here and you will not think that he was a good man. He was a time and place. He instilled some things that I think are positive for our country, but no, he owned slaves. And that's what I tell my kids. He owned slaves and he could have freed them upon his death and he chose not to. Well,
I think that gets the point across.
That. It's interesting you say that.
Oh, did he? Am I right about that? I might be wrong. That's what I thought. Okay.
Well, he died. And now I will say that a lot of historians will argue that, he really was against slavery and he was for the eventual abolition. But I kind of wonder if that was like a PR kind of take, but behind closed doors, because he and Martha were well matched. So I would imagine if she had this attitude, his was very similar as well. And yes, it's a time and a place and slavery was legal. But there's different people. So I'll get to that. So I'm almost finished. But, so he died on December 14th, 1799. By all accounts, Martha was devastated. She was so grief stricken. She couldn't even attend the funeral. That's how devastated she was.
Okay.
So now again, remember the majority of their slaves came from Martha's first husband, Daniel Parke Custis. So upon George's death, he actually did free his slaves. But it was only about probably, because remember, he was given slaves from his father's estate, 10. So let's say, I don't know how many he had. I didn't look it up because this is about her story. So let's say he had 25, 50, right? People that he owned. So he actually freed his slaves. But at this point, the majority of the slave labor still at Mount Vernon are the ones from Custis that are technically being loaned to Martha, right?
Right.
So, now I would say this, he mandated that certain slaves would be free upon Martha's death. So let me rephrase that. So he freed his slaves upon Martha's death, his slaves, right?
Okay.
Now,
so it could be 25 more years before she dies, but okay.
Yeah. Now, this may seem like a good idea, but not really, because as the astute and lovely Abigail Adams, the second first lady of the U.S., said to her, to Martha, there's not really much of a reason for slaves to keep you alive, because their freedom is dependent upon your death. So,
right. Yes, Abigail. Way to phrase. Way to meet her where she is at. Good job, girl.
Yes.
Good job.
So, about a year later, in December of 1800, Martha signed a deed of manumission for her deceased husband's slaves. A transaction that was recorded, in Fairfax County, Virginia, and they would become free basically the day after. So January 1st, 1801, because Abigail's like, okay. How you feeling lately?
How's your soup? Does it go down easily or?
Yeah. So about a year and a half later after that, and after an illness of several weeks, she actually died on May 22nd, 1802. and was buried at Mount Vernon next to George Washington. She was 70 years old. Okay. Now, final wrap up. Her legacy, again, as a Black person, this is the reality of being a Black American person who are a descendant of enslaved labor here in the United States. This is something that it's not that we've made peace with it, but we know that this is a reality. Oftentimes, the white people who are celebrated in history and American history and glorified as all this, we're like,
yeah. Yeah.
Which is why when it comes to politics, we have Black voters shrewdly are like, yeah, both of the parties have some racial issues, but one party is like actively trying to take Black people to 1850. Like there's one party, maybe they don't do enough as much as you want them to do, but at least they've come around, and they generally have laws and beliefs and things that they want to accomplish that help the majority of Americans, including Black people. And then there's the other party who are like, we don't want the niggers to even be able to walk down the street and not be tased by the cops. It's just like, come on, guys. Like we don't and they want to deny that slavery ever existed. They want to deny all the stuff I just told you about Oni Judge. They want to deny all of that. Whereas the other side is like, yeah, we're going to have to admit, reality is reality. Yeah. So that's all we're saying. So the reality of most Black voters in the United States is that, yeah, we're not going to get everything we want. Duh.
Because that doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist.
The more you know about American history, the idea of only voting to get exactly what you want personally is ridiculous, because it's insane.
Well, it's just not. Because it was founded, slavery and racism is not a bug. It's a feature of the United States.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make amends. We're trying to bend towards justice. We're trying to do all of that, while also there's a strong element within the foundation of America that's like, nope, like it was fine just the way it was.
Right. And that's why when people are like, no, our founding fathers and our Constitution and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I don't know why you keep acting like it was perfect, that it was biblical, that it wasn't. It was so very flawed.
Yeah. And it's and as a Black person, that's something that we have to accept. For instance, Martha Washington was a fabulous first lady. She was a fabulous first lady.
Yeah.
She was a fabulous first lady in the sense that what white wealthy women represented, how she opened up the White House to the public and all of this other stuff. She was a wonderful diplomat for the White House, for this new American government. She was also problematic as fuck. She was also one of those white ladies, one of those Karens who are like, you should be grateful that we treat you, that we didn't beat you every day. And it's like, but she kind of sounds like she probably would have, because I don't know that much about Mount Vernon history. I just know, I didn't go into the details of because there is research out there. You guys can definitely look it up, of what the day-to-day activities and experience was for the enslaved at Mount Vernon. And it ain't great. Because it's always the people who really didn't earn their wealth who look down on other people who don't have it, right? It's always the people who they inherited this wealth from Daniel, basically.
They earned absolutely nothing. George Washington earned votes to become president. But honestly,
it doesn't mean he wasn't a good soldier. It doesn't mean that we aren't glad that we're not all speaking British. It doesn't mean that we aren't all proud to be Americans, but let's just be realistic about American history. Because again, I think that Martha Washington was an excellent first lady. Some of the things that began with her that continued throughout, that has continued throughout our history, is that she started the tradition of advising successors. So welcoming in the new first lady and giving her advice and being available to her. That's a very gracious thing. She was prominent in the ceremonial aspects of the presidency, assisting her husband as his role as head of state, but she also had very little public involvement. So she sort of set that precedent. So some of our like most famous first ladies, Jackie O, like are in the image that Martha Washington set of being,
Right.
supportive of your husband, being elegant, hosting, balls and being a gracious host to visiting people, to
I
people
like that you
visiting
can
the White
find
House.
her positive. I'm impressed, actually, honestly, because she also tried to track down a slave and called her ungrateful, which is like, you know, I mean, it's
Again,
people are
this is what
complicated,
being
but
right.
oof,
This is what being
that's
black in
rough.
America is all about, because the reality is
Yeah,
is that this is also my history. I'm an American.
yeah,
This is my
yeah.
history. And this is all we're saying. We just want you to know both all of the aspects of these people. I don't think when people are like, "Oh, it's complicated." I'm like, "No, they were just bigots and they owned slaves, but it doesn't mean
Yeah,
that they weren't good. It doesn't mean he wasn't a good president for the
right.
majority of free white people. It doesn't mean that,
But it's
that,
like, but you have to, but what we have to do is be able to say that he was a good
right.
president for the majority of white people, landowning white people, right? And he was, and they set up this country to run.
Exactly.
But
They
like
set it up after breaking away from England. They set it up.
but
So
here's
he was
the thing that
successful in that
I
sense.
always say is that, like, again, nothing is inevitable, right?
Right.
So what
Right.
if they abolished slavery at the beginning
Right.
of this country? What if he said, I will not be, I know you love me, but this is terrible. And enough people stood up and fought the South and said, you know what we'll do is we'll do a system where we slowly free them. Right? Some kind of system where we start with paying them a little. We start with making sure that they don't live in squalor and that they are not abused. Okay? Like, it's not even that hard or out of the realm of
Well,
possibility. Just didn't happen.
it was because, again, when they go to Philadelphia
Yeah.
and they encounter the law, because basically he wrote and he was like, "I'm the president. I shouldn't have to adhere to the law."
Right.
And he was advised that that's not a good look,
That
player. That's not a good
doesn't
look.
wait, I'm the president. I shouldn't have to adhere to the law. Does that sound
Um,
familiar? Oh, I'm just
so,
asking a question.
but he listened to his advisors, because his advisors are like, "Nah, player, you can't. Nope, nope,
Yeah.
you cannot. This is not a monarch." Because again, they're coming off of the
Right. This is
tyranny
not a
of
monarchy.
King
Exactly.
George, right?
Right. Right.
So, so it's sometimes you have to use people's. So that's like a weakness of his, that he cares about public image. That's the only reason they weren't successful at kidnapping Oni. Because then they tried.
And that's good. I mean, listen, I'm not fighting for the monarchy, but I am
Right.
saying that while there is one, yes, we don't have a monarchy. Yes, that president had to follow the law. Good. Not very common in Western civilization to see that at that time. But no, we could have done better. Like, stop saying that slavery was inevitable and that's the only way our country could have been. Because,
Yeah.
like, I'm tired of hearing that. It's just not true.
Me
It's just
too.
not
But
true.
I mean, I think she's a fabulous woman, especially to kick off our third season.
Yes.
It's not complicated. It's just reality. It's just people. It's just human beings.
Yeah, it's just people. I like that.
Who are selfish, self-centered, and it doesn't mean they can't also do good things in other ways. So
Yeah.
that is my notorious woman, Martha Washington. So
Amazing. All right, Lavetta.
yes.
Lavetta,
Yes.
you ready for mine?
I'm ready.
Okay. I'm going to power through her early years to get to
Okay.
what I'd like to talk about. Have you ever heard of a woman named Mother Teresa?
Yes, I have. Of course I have,
Mm.
Mother Teresa.
She's who I'm going to talk about today.
All righty then. Let's go, baby.
Yeah, today is a good day. Okay.
Yes.
So she was born, I cannot pronounce, Angeze Gongse Bojaksu, I don't know, in Skopje in the Ottoman Empire, August 26th, 1910. Another way she was seen before she became Mother Teresa was Mary Teresa. But listen, it'll be on our Instagram where you can see how it's spelled.
Is it Turkish or?
I think so.
Okay.
Albanian, maybe.
Oh, maybe.
So she was the youngest child of Nicole and Dranophile, that last name. I'm not going to butcher it. Her father died when she was 8. When she was very young, she became fascinated by stories of the lives of missionaries and their service in Bengal. By 12, she was convinced she should commit herself to religious life. At 18, 1928, she left home to join the Sisters of Loreto in Loreto Abbey in Rathfarnham, Ireland, to learn English with the intent of becoming a missionary. So English was the language of the Sisters of Loreto in India, and she left at 18. She never saw her mother or her sister again.
Oh, wow.
So she arrived in India in 1929. She began her novitiate in Darjeeling in the lower Himalayas.
See, I thought she was Indian. Huh.
No, she's not. I know. I thought so too. Isn't that interesting? So she learned Bengali. So she ended up speaking like 5 languages. She taught at St. Teresa's school near her convent and took her first religious vows May 24th, 1931. She wanted to be named after Thérèse de Lisieux, who was the patron saint of missionaries. But there was a nun there who already had that name. So she went with the Spanish spelling. So it was Therese, but then she became Mother Teresa without the H.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
So she took her solemn vows on May 14th, 1937, when she was a teacher at the convent school. In Enteley, eastern Calcutta. And she was called Mother because that was the Loreto custom. That's
okay.
It wasn't, it was like a different thing, I guess, than we know of, I think. She served there almost 20 years and was appointed its headmistress in 1944. So she loved teaching at the school, but she was very bothered by the poverty that was surrounding her in Calcutta. There was a famine in Bengal in 1943, which brought, misery and death. And then there was August 1946 called Direct Action Day, began a period of Muslim-Hindu violence. So obviously the poor of that area suffered the most.
Right. Of course.
September 10th, 1946, she experienced what she later described as, quote, the call within the call. So she was traveling by train to the Loreto convent in Darjeeling from Calcutta for her annual retreat. Quote, I was to leave the convent and help the poor while living among them. It was an order. To fail would have been to break the faith. So that's what came to her on that train. That she was like, I can't stay at this convent anymore. I have to go help these people. So she began her missionary work with the poor in 1948. She adopted Indian citizenship and spent several months in Patna to receive basic medical training at Holy Family Hospital. And then she ventured into the slums. She founded a school in Motijil, Calcutta, before she began tending to the poor and the hungry. At the beginning of 1949, she was joined in her effort by a group of young women, and she laid the foundation for a new religious community, helping, quote, the poorest among the poor. So her efforts quickly caught the attention of Indian officials, including the prime minister. She writes in her diary that the first year was fraught with difficulty, that she had no income. She begged for food, supplies. She felt a lot of doubt and was very lonely. In 1950, she founded the Missionaries of Charity, which was a diocesan congregation. I'm Jewish. I probably said that wrong. And hashtag not historians. I'm not 100% what that means, but it was a type of congregation. Cool. And she chose a white sari with 2 blue borders as the order's habit. And if you've seen pictures of her, that's what she's wearing.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You know, right? And then she received permission from the Vatican to do this. So this is what we have all been told, right? This is what we know of her as. She, in 1952, opened her first hospice with the help of Calcutta officials. She created the Calicut Home for the Dying, free for the poor, and she renamed it Calicut, the Home of the Pure Heart. Those she brought to the home received medical attention and the opportunity to die with dignity in accordance with their faith, right? So Muslims read the Quran, Hindus received water from the Ganges, Catholics received extreme unction. Quote, a beautiful death is for people who lived like animals to die like angels, loved and wanted. Okay. So she also opened a hospice for those with leprosy, calling it Shanti Nagar, which meant city of peace. And they established a leprosy outreach clinics, like several of them, throughout Calcutta, providing medication, dressings, and food. They took in an increasing number of homeless children. And then eventually in 1955, created a haven for orphans and homeless youth called the Children's Home of the Immaculate Heart. Mm-hmm. So this began to attract recruits and donations. And by the 1960s, it had opened hospices, orphanages, and leper houses throughout India. Right. She then expanded, right? This is how we know her congregation abroad, yeah. Right? There's a house in Venezuela, Italy, Tanzania, and Austria. And in the 70s, she opened houses and foundations in the United States and dozens of countries in Asia, Africa, and Europe. There's like more. There's also the missionary brothers. It's a lot. So, in the couple of other things that she did, I mean, there is a lot. She did, she had AIDS hospices, charity centers worldwide. She cared for refugees, the blind, disabled, all the things you think about when you think about Mother Teresa, right? Another thing, during the siege of Beirut in 1982, she rescued 37 children that were trapped in a frontline hospital. And she herself brokered a temporary ceasefire between the Israeli army and the Palestinian guerrillas. Now, some of her problematic moments came about. So she was very Catholic. She didn't believe in abortion or divorce. Right. So Eastern Europe became more open in the late 80s. So she began lots of projects there, but there was a lot of criticism about her stance against abortion and divorce. There's a lot. She went to Albania for the first time in 1991, opening Missionaries of Charity Brothers Home in Tirana. I could just go on. There's also one in the South Bronx in the 80s. Mm-hmm. She received many awards, including the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979. Some Hindus, as I read this, that even today worship her as a deity in Calcutta. So, right. So these are things.
So we know this. What are you not telling me?
Okay, you're just like, that's not interesting. So
I was just like, I feel like there's like a big unspoken but.
Okay. Well, let's just hear what other people have to say.
Okay.
So a man named Arup Chatterjee was a physician who was born and raised in Calcutta, who was an activist in the city slums for the years around 1980 before moving to the UK. And he said that, quote, he never even saw any nuns in those slums. His research, involving more than 100 interviews with volunteers, nuns, and others familiar with the Missionaries of Charity, was described in a 2003 book, which was critical of Mother Teresa. He says that she promoted a, quote, cult of suffering, unquote, and a distorted negative image of Calcutta, exaggerating work done by her mission and misusing funds and privileges at her disposal. In particular, yeah, okay, this is...
he's spilling the tea, baby. He's spilling the tea.
And I'm like, this guy grew up here and like walked around there and like knows the area, right? He's not like some outsider. He's like, I'm in medicine too, and you did none of this. He had heard, he heard stories of the lack of basic hygiene, the absence of any pain medication, and the frequent reuse of hypodermic needles.
Oh, no. No,
indeed. Ugh. So the book, which was originally titled Mother Teresa, The Final Verdict, says that in addition to the hours of interviews, he says about his journey to find this, quote, I started in pre-internet days and I spent months in libraries in London. I also traveled the world researching it. I followed slum dwellers, beggars, destitute children with a video camera. I interviewed hundreds of people. I stood with video camera outside Teresa's home for hours. After Mother Teresa, I'll just cut to it. She died in 1997. I'll talk more about that later. A lot of those issues, the hygiene issues, improved after she died. So, because
what is up with people with bad hygiene? Especially religious people, because there's a part of them that's like, well, God will protect me from this. It's like, no, God gave you science to know when you should clean your ass, people. Just wash your hands. That's all.
Science. Wash your hands. It took us like a long time to figure out to wash our hands. So like, let's do that now. Like now we know. Now.
Yeah.
Right?
Now we know.
Well, there's something, remember, she's religious before she's anything.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I mean. Like they think if they pray about it hard enough, but it's like God also gives you, it's that parable of like you're lost at sea and you're like, God's going to rescue me. And then a ship comes by and you're like, no, I'm waiting on God to rescue me. And it's like, a helicopter comes by and you're like, well, you just going to be waiting to God to send like 4-5 people to get you. You just want to be shark bait. That's what you want.
Stupid. I know.
Anyway.
I mean, because there's a lot of, and I'm definitely not knocking religion, but I am knocking people's interpretation of religion.
Well, you're knocking when people are just not using common damn sense. It's like,
in the idea that poverty brings them closer to God, suffering brings them closer to God, and I'm giving all of these suffering people to God, so I am closer to God because of that.
Yeah.
So that's like fucked up.
Yeah.
So Bikash Ranjan Bhattacharya, who's the mayor of Calcutta from 2005 to 2010, said, quote, she had no significant impact on the poor of the city.
Damn.
End quote. She also says, but not in a quote, that she glorified illness instead of treating it and misrepresented the city. New quote. No doubt there was poverty in Calcutta, but it was never a city of lepers and beggars as Mother Teresa presented it. So there's also, because Christians and Hindus, and no one likes to get along, everyone likes to fight. So there was clashing with her. And so that's important to know. So on the Hindu right, the Bharatiya Janata Party clashed with Mother Teresa over the Christian Dalits, although they did praise her in her death and they sent a representative to her funeral. So Secretary Giriraj Kishore said, quote, her first duty was to the church and social service was incidental. And he accused her of favoring Christians and conducting secret baptisms of the dying. And then, of course, Indian Fortnightly Frontline, which is a magazine or a newspaper, dismissed those charges as patently false. So she wasn't necessarily fully embraced in there.
Well, it kind of reminds me of that, like, it's sort of like people want to, it's like performative care, right? Like, look at me, I'm a good person because I'm doing all this stuff. And the people are like, it's not even bad. Like, it's bad, but it's not like you're characterizing it as like an impossible, like she's exaggerating is basically what it sounds like they're saying, that she allegedly, because we don't get sued, exaggerated how bad Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
and they're like, also, like, now knowing that she's not Indian, it's like an outsider coming in
Yes, exactly.
and being like, oh, these poor Indian people. You're like, bitch, you're not even.
Mm-mm. Can you leave? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I thought this was interesting because this is a paper by Canadian academics. So this is sort of they're not involved, right? So Serge Larive, Geneviève Chenard, and Carol Seneschal. I mean, I took French once, but I'm so sorry.
Show off.
I know, right?
I'm like
so
French.
good.
I'm like, parlez-vous français?
Oh, wow. That hurt a little. Okay. They say that her clinics received millions of dollars in donations, but lacked medical care, systematic diagnosis, necessary nutrition, and sufficient analgesic, like things to numb the pain. I can't say it. Analgesics things to numb the pain for people who were in pain. And in the opinion of the three academics, quote, Mother Teresa believed that the sick must suffer like Christ on the cross.
See, there it is. There it is.
And it was said that the additional money might have transformed the health of the city's poor by creating advanced palliative care facilities. And that was the thing that always threw me. It was like, how are we not better? Like, if you throw in a really good hospital in the middle of an area that is, poor and doesn't have enough hygiene and enough things, then you will improve life.
Yeah, if you put a hospital that's well funded.
Yes.
Why isn't there some improvement happening? Yeah.
So one of Mother Teresa's most outspoken critics was English journalist and anti-theist Christopher Hitchens. Do you know Christopher Hitchens?
No, I'm not familiar. That sounds familiar, but that sounds like
he's a very atheist person.
Okay.
I like him. He's controversial and I don't like everything about him. But so he said, because he researched a lot of this too, and wrote an article in 2003 and said, quote, this returns us to the medieval corruption of the church, which sold indulgences to the rich while preaching hellfire and continence to the poor. Mother Teresa was not a friend of the poor. She was a friend of poverty. She said that suffering was a gift from God. She spent her life opposing the only known cure for poverty, which is the empowerment of women and the emancipation of them from a livestock version of compulsory reproduction. End quote. Boom.
Yeah, boom.
But you know what?
Yo.
I don't know how wrong he is,
Damn. He called Mother Teresa out.
Yeah. And there's a quote from her that she says, I'm not a social worker. I don't do it for this reason. I do it for Christ. I do it for the church. Now, I know a lot of really good Christians who, if they do something in honor of Christ, I'm Jewish. I know that sounds weird out of my mouth, but there you go. It's good stuff for bettering the world.
It's always that Christ is working through me to help other people. I'm just a vessel.
It only works so other people are getting better. I'm just saying. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Wow. This is mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. So she also, problematically, and it's all alleged.
Yeah, of course.
She argued in 1994 that the sexual abuse allegations against a Jesuit priest, Donald McGuire, were untrue. Even after he was convicted of sexually molesting multiple children in 2006, she continued to defend him. Hold on, because she was dead. So I read that, but that makes zero sense. I apologize. So she did defend him, but he was convicted in 2006.
Oh, okay.
But she is 100% dead in 2006. So didn't defend him.
She didn't come back from the dead.
She didn't. No. Okay. As far as I know, listen, hashtag not historians, right? Hashtag not historians. If it happened, God, tell me. Let me know.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. That's
So
hilarious.
in what I think is really interesting, so in 1996, April, she broke her collarbone after falling. 4 months later,
Ooh.
she had malaria and heart failure, and she
Oh.
went through heart surgery. But then her health declined. And then, according to Archbishop of Calcutta, Henry Sebastian de Souza, he ordered a priest to perform an exorcism with her permission when she was first hospitalized with cardiac problems because he thought maybe she was, yeah.
You cannot.
What? I said
An
it.
exorcism? What?
Yeah, yeah. It
Let me
is
bring
very
up my
real.
southern. An exorcism?
But, I mean, that didn't work. But she died September 5th, 1997. Though she survived for a little bit, you know.
So I have heart problems, and it must be
Yeah.
the devil. Need an exorcism. What?
Does
What
explain
is
a
going?
lot.
What in the
Yeah.
tarnation is going on here? What?
That's what they said. And so they exorcised her.
my
Is that how you say that? Do you exorcise someone?
I
I
think
don't know.
so.
Is it a verb?
I don't know. Listen, I don't do exorcism movies. Nope.
No, I don't either.
Nope.
No, I don't either. It's like I don't believe in any of it, but like
Nope.
maybe it's true. So I'm not
yeah,
playing.
nope,
You know,
not
it's like
doing it.
ghosts. Like I think there are no ghosts. But what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
I'm not messing with that.
You stay right over there, ghost. Don't come over here. Yep.
I'm not interested in you. She was beautified,
Deified or no?
no,
You said,
Beatified on
deified?
October 19th, 2003, and was known by Catholics as blessed. And then she was canonized by Pope Francis September 4th, 2016 in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City.
See, this is what I mean about like we can appreciate maybe the work that she has done, but like her views on. I mean, the exorcism tells me all I need to know. It sounds
Yeah.
like she's just. I mean, in real talk and like honestly and sincerely, like she sounds like a religious zealot.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
also need to be a religious zealot to want to travel to other parts of the world and the poorest part of towns, whatever your motivation is to help people. So I can appreciate that there's people in the world who want to help people. But then it's like, did she exaggerate the help that she was offering?
Coming from like her point of view, she was probably doing God's work.
Right.
From her point of view, we know that these people needed support. They needed emancipation from a patriarchy because these women probably were having baby after baby and not getting the medical support they needed because having a baby is a medical situation.
These people they needed birth control, sanitizer, and alcohol, and disposable hypodermic needles.
Yeah, lots of them.
Yes.
So that you never have to use one more than once.
Yes.
Dear God. But I can see that from her point of view, where the poor and the suffering are God's chosen, right? Yeah. That she is giving them emotional comfort as they are giving themselves up to God.
Right.
I mean, I'm fighting here, but
it's also, but let's be real. Let's be realistic too. Real talk is like, if somebody asks you for, soup, right?
Yeah.
Or $1 to buy soup, and you say, let's pray about it instead. It's like, no, motherfucker, I need soup.
$1 or soup. You $1 or soup, or I'll move on to the next.
I need God too, but I also need some soup.
Yeah. I mean, missionaries in general can be problematic. If anyone has read the Poisonwood Bible, it's spelled out beautifully in that beautiful book. Because if you want to really help people, you will meet them where they are at.
Right.
And
bingo.
that is, they'll humor you because they're hungry and they need clean water, but it's not as selfless. That's not selfless.
Yeah.
Does that
bingo.
make sense?
And it's okay. Yeah. It's okay. Like, let's say you're a religious organization, and you're like, well, we offer free soup if you just come in and hear the sermon, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
fine.
okay, that's like giving somebody, it's like bartering, right? It's like,
Yeah.
30 minutes or an hour of their time for a meal. Most people are
Yeah.
like, okay, I'll put up with but it's like, I'm going to deny you basic stuff, unless you're not just hear the sermon, but let me,
Yeah.
like, I have soap over here and I'm going to dangle it in front of you, but I'm only going to give you I'm going to wet the soap a little bit and not give you water to rinse. It's just like the emotional blackmail.
Yeah.
Or like you're withholding the soup. Like, so let's say you say, okay, you come in and listen to the sermon and we'll give you a meal. The person listens to the sermon and you don't give them a meal, or you give them a small piece of bread when you made it seem like it was going to be soup, bread, vegetables, and
Right. Like
juice.
a real meal. Right.
Right? Yeah. It's
mean,
that kind of thing.
I mean, and it's funny because that's why I gave different accounts of different people who analyzed her later, because it's hard to get a good focused viewpoint of what she was really doing, because she opened so many places.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening with those places now, to be honest. But there is, we do have someone saying as soon as she died, it became more sanitary.
Yeah. And let's, to be fair to her legacy also, thank God she opened up all of those. So even when she died and then it became, more clean and more helpful.
Right.
Thank God those places have been established and have been opened up. So
right. So that,
the infrastructure's there to, disseminate actual help and aid and stuff. So, but again, not complicated, just real human beings. Both of these women are flawed human beings who also did some good. So
weird. Yeah. Happy season 3, everybody.
I mean, I know. I mean, I'm not going to call Mother Teresa the B word because I'm just not.
No, we can't do that. No,
but Martha Washington, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But wow, thank you so much for sharing that about Mother Teresa.
All right.
Wow. Like you said, what a way to start season 3. And And thank you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. And hopefully Miriam enjoyed my story on Martha Washington. And
I mean, I'm exhausted, but yes, it was fascinating. I want this movie, by the way, that they will never, ever make. They will never make this movie. Not in this country.
Maybe 50 years from now. Yeah. I mean,
maybe, yeah.
Well, on that note, that wraps it up for another episode of Notorious Women Podcast. Guys, remember to follow us on what? All the things. So
all the things.
Go to Twitter. Oh, we're not on Twitter, but Instagram. But wherever you get your podcasts, download us, subscribe to us, share us with your friends. I believe that iCatcher is disbanding at the end of August, I believe, but you can still find us in the Apple Store.
Yes.
And please leave a 5-star review. But also you can find us on Spotify, I believe iHeart radio, podcast.
It's literally every other one. Yeah.
Yeah. Everywhere you can find us. So please, and again, we always say this is easier. Just copy the link and send it to your friend or loved one instead of just telling them about it. So copy the link and send it to them because it's so much easier. So much easier.
Yeah.
And
just play. Easy.
That's all they have to do is click on it and be like, oh, okay. And then hit subscribe. And then also, if you'd like to become a patron of our Patreon, we would love that. You can do that at patreon.com/notoriouswomen. That's patreon.com/notoriouswomen. And Miriam will tell you other ways you can get in touch with us.
Yes, we have our Instagram, as Lavetta mentioned. It's so easy. It's Notorious Women Podcast. It's a fun, good time. Come follow us.
Yep.
Come talk to us there. We also have an email, which is our notoriouswmpod@gmail.com. So you can send us any thoughts you have there. You can also DM us. We'll see that. So however you want to talk to us is good with us.
Yeah, I'm really interested if you guys have any feedback on both Martha Washington and Mother Teresa, because wow.
Listen, if you give us feedback on things, we can do special episodes where we go back and discuss, because we would totally do that. We're super open.
Yes, we will. And until next time, until next week, bye-bye.
Bye.